Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us here, 21 days out from the election. Um, as Joe Trippi was just pointing out, we were talking off camera that about this time in 21 days, the polls will be closing and we can all get ready to leave the country. So thanks for joining us. It's this final stretch I always find uh, kind of magical because you've looked forward to it, you've planned for it, you thought it would never get here, and now it's here. And it's great to be here with Joe Trippi. You should definitely be listening to that Trippi show. Um, Joe is the best, I think, of that generation of Democratic consultants, and it was a real honor when he joined the Lincoln Project a few years ago. And David Pepper, who is a man of many talents, ran the Democratic Party in Ohio uh, for a long time. I lost some races to those guys. And now has this fascinating new podcast, Trump's Project 2025, Up Close Personal. And rather than me trying to explain what it is, David, since we've got you here, can you tell us about it?
Sure. It's great to be back. The point of this was, we're watching. It's getting even worse right now. Trump is saying the wildest things. We see it
Yep.
every day. We know what Project 2025 says, and it's gotten too normalized. What I try
Yep.
to do, and this was originally a sort of a book that we've now turned into a podcast. Some great talented folks have helped me do this. Is make sure people understand what this would look like if he were to win. Because sometimes when we see it as a list of bullet points, it goes right over our heads. We don't take it seriously. I believe very strongly that Trump is building a mandate with everything he says. And if he wins, he's going to say the voters knew, the voters heard it, the voters spoke. And so what this does, this podcast, is it tries to make real what would these promises look like in action? What would mass deportation look like? It'd be horrible. It'd be a humanitarian disaster.
Yeah.
What would the attack on workers and unions look like? That's the one that we're releasing tomorrow. What would schools without vaccine mandates actually look like? I mean, all of it. And,
So,
and
so,
what would a weaponized DOJ look like? Because Project 2025 takes away all the guardrails so that
Yep.
Trump can do the revenge he wants to do against Liz Cheney or Adam Schiff or anybody. Using the
so,
military. So it's to make it real for people so they understand this is not a game, this is not a drill. He's deadly serious. We need to see what it will actually look like. That's what it
so
does.
just to make sure everybody understands, you wrote this originally as a novel to be serialized, correct?
Yeah, and I actually have already turned it into an actual book.
And now you
It's,
have an actual book.
yeah, yeah.
Um, which can you get that?
You can get this basically on Amazon or online in other ways.
Okay, all
Cool.
right, fantastic. And when you wrote it originally, did you have the idea of turning it into a podcast?
I didn't, but I was a good friend of ours named Jay Feldman, who works for the Bill Press podcast,
Right.
liked it so much that he called me up and he said, "Hey, I think we should turn this into something we release as quickly as we can." And so, and he also said to me, "And we should have celebrities read it." And I thought, "Oh, that's great. I'd love to have a treasure chest fall in my yard too." But 3 months later, we've actually managed to get some incredibly talented people to help put it together. But
So,
also, the chapter that we're releasing tomorrow is read by Wendell Pierce,
Yeah.
one of the great actors, Fisher Stevens. We will have Mark Hamill reading a chapter next week. So we've
wow.
really managed to put something together that I hope people do pay attention to. It really, the reason I've written this book into this is I think we have to make sure people see that the stakes aren't just all the things that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz would do, but the stakes on the other side are quite dire and dark, and we should take everything Trump is saying deadly seriously. No longer laugh it off. No longer dismiss this as something he would never do.
So, Joe, what do you think is happening with Donald Trump in the last just 72 hours? He seems to have deteriorated. What's
Well,
this about, do you think?
he's been deteriorating for a long time, but this is
Yeah.
just sort of sped up. And I also think, I think Kamala's doing a great job of saying,
Yep.
hey, watch him at,
Yeah.
putting people's focus on it. Watch those rallies. Listen to what he's saying. The same thing that David just said. Listen to what he's saying, which I think is one of the most important things about what David's doing is make it clear what they're doing, what they're going to say, what the stakes are. But I think the more focus that gets on on Trump at these rallies, I mean, when he just sort of for 39 minutes sort of sways back and forth and listens to plays his playlist, and that's like one of the more quasi normal things that happen at his rallies now. It's pretty. Again, it's more doubling down on the bro thing, pushing everybody else away. And, I think, you look at the state of the race right now. I know we'll get into that, but I'd much rather be Kamala Harris in the pro-democracy side of this right now than trying to somehow expand Trump beyond that 46 ceiling, 47 ceiling. He's
well. Let you just say. I thought that to follow up on that, what Harris did at her rally last night in Erie, I thought was she played clips of Trump's rallies. And I thought, I would have liked to have been in the room to come up with that idea. Because they're sitting there, how do you get people to focus on this? Somebody said, well, what if we put up the fucking rally and make people show it and it'll be part of our rally? And, that's just so smart. And it really shows how they're maximizing the moment. I was doing a little thing on Joy Reid last night, and they were going to go to this, and they were talking off camera. They said, this is the Harris people really won't tell us, but they say something different is going to happen tonight, which had the added benefit that they went live to the rally. Right. And then, damn if they didn't pull this off. But on the state of the race, David, how do you see it now?
I mean, I think it's a jump ball. Obviously, I think you're right, Joe, that he's getting. I think he has more of a ceiling, and as much as these are close, I still think she has more of the upside. The one thing I tried, I'm going to do a whiteboard on this tomorrow. In 2020, because of COVID, Democrats didn't door knock. We didn't have, and we know this year that Trump has not really invested in field. I mean, I hear I hear this from Republicans. He's kind of given it out to some companies, which is a roll of dice. So the other thing is, if we go in with a little bit of a lead, you got to hope that the fact that we are door knocking this time when we didn't 4 years ago, and the fact that Trump is basically eating up the money for lawsuits and legal fees and not field, hopefully that matters too. And so the thing that once you're done giving to the races you can give to, and there's still some state house races and Supreme Court races I urge people to give to, know that if they're not doing much, it's not just that every door you knock on is a door counter to what they're knocking on. They may not be knocking on doors at all. So everything everyone listening does is probably net to the good. The other side, from all I'm hearing, has either a bizarre or no field operation whatsoever.
David,
21 days to go. As Simon said the other day, goal, win every single day. And unless you're in a broad communication space, the way to win is to go knock on doors and make phone calls, knowing that they probably aren't doing nearly as much as we'll be doing.
But, David, the other advantage is the more of us who vote early, that allows that organization to take us out of the list.
This is a really important
focus
point.
Those resources, focus the resources and this organization that they've built to go after and turn out the people who haven't voted early. So every time one of us does that, and the more we do that, the more we encourage others to do it. It narrows the target list for a much more robust get out the vote effort, knocking on doors, calling, all the things that you're talking about that we didn't do in 2020.
So, Joe,
we can do on a more targeted basis the more we win this early.
Great point.
Just take 30 seconds and to folks that may not kind of understand the mechanics of that. Explain how that works with the call list and the.
Well, look, the campaign knows it's who it's for. They've identified people that are for them or people in their base. Right. They've got a list of all those people. As we vote early, the secretaries of state or the election officials post those names. That's data that gets put out immediately. Yeah. The campaign can take those names off, knowing that they voted already. So, David Pepper, I voted already here in Maryland.
Right.
My name's off the list. In these key states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, those states, this is going to be really important because if 700,000 of us have already voted, they're not taking that organization and all that money and knocking on our doors. They can cross those names off. Now they're going to lower propensity, but base voters or voters that they've identified that are for Harris Walls, and they can target the door knocks,
Right.
the phone calls, the text, everything at that group of voters. And like David was saying, we're stronger there. And the other side, we don't even know if they've developed the lists or any of that stuff because they tore all that stuff apart. When Trump put his daughter-in-law in at the RNC, they really don't have much of a ground game. So I think that's a huge advantage that David's pointing out. And if we are in a dead heat, which I just don't believe that, when you look at those polls that we just put up a minute ago, look at Trump's number. Look at how many times the number 46 comes up.
Yep.
It does. There's a few 48s in there, but most of them are 46, 46. Harris 50, 46. The New York Times, they're all 46. You got a couple 45, which is the Econ YouGov poll. She's at 51 in many of these 49, and I think 49s are lowest. He's between 48 and 46, but almost always 46. So I just think she's got a lead. It's a small one. It's going to be close, but those advantages that David talked about are really critical in terms of the ground game and the difference between 2020 and today.
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental question in this race of who is the incumbent. Normally, say this was Bush Gore, 2000. Gore was the incumbent. He was incumbent vice president. But I think in this race, I would debate this. I would take in an Oxford debate this side of the argument that Trump is the incumbent because it is a referendum on Trump and whether or not you want to go back to Donald Trump. And one thing we know about polling is incumbents get what they get in the tracking. Mm-hmm. And, you talk about these so-called undecided voters, and it's a very imprecise term, as we all know. I think more than undecided, you have people who are deciding different things on different days. Well, I kind of lean this way one day and lean this way the other. But, time and again, what has driven this more than anything else is the favorable or unfavorable view that you have of these candidates, which makes sense. Because think about it. If you're not sure you're going to vote, you're sure as hell not going to wake up in the morning and go vote for somebody you have an unfavorable opinion of. Like, why am I going to do that? Or if you are voting for somebody else, you'll just leave that blank. And Harris's favorables are higher, particularly with the voters who count, which I would say the non-MAGA voters. And I think a lot of these numbers are distorted because for the first time, we have 70% of the other party, Republican Party, thinks that Joe Biden is not a legally elected president. So what can you say to these people? Say, okay, like I know Biden stole the White House, but what about that Infrastructure Act, baby? Nothing works. So instead of, I think it distorts these numbers because if you think Biden stole the election, you're going to give him, what's your favorable view of him? It's zero, probably. He stole the election. I'd love to see polling numbers that was just the universe of those who thought that Joe Biden was a legally elected president, which is the universe that we would have worked with any other race before. This was never a question. But there seems to be something very interesting happening with white women. And, we don't talk enough, I think, about how race drives our politics. This is a true statement. Romney won younger voters against Obama if they were white. He won women against Obama by, I think, 17 points if they were white. Trump is losing evangelicals by 90% if they're black. And I think we just don't for some reason, we have difficulty coming to grips with that. But right now in these numbers, Trump is headed to become the first Republican in modern history ever to lose white women. And I wonder, David, are you seeing this in Ohio just with your sort of anecdotal?
I'll just say that I always go back to 22, the Vance,
right?
The Vance small victory versus the DeWine large victory.
So
DeWine
just
won
talk about
by
that. So
6.
explain that to people. It's
Yeah, Mike DeWine, the
400,000.
governor, the Republican governor, got reelected by 26, and Vance barely scraped by at 6 to 7 when it was a total Republican year. I think most of that margin was women in the suburbs.
We're talking 400,000 voters, right?
Yeah, a huge difference. And I
Yeah,
think
that's an
that was
unbelievable number.
a guy who felt to them, and I have a lot of things I disagree with DeWine on, but who didn't feel sort of scary to them, who had been responsible for COVID, and someone who, as we all know now, thinks that childless women are angry cat, whatever he calls them. And I do think there's a big swing there. And I think that someone talking like Trump and someone with Vance on the ticket, as you saw in Ohio, there is a big swing between one type of Republican and another type of Republican. And I do hope that, in any normal year, by the way, if we had a normal turn on our side, Vance loses that race because he did so poorly with women. And obviously with white women, including, and the hope is obviously, as you're saying, that sort of Trump's historic problem there cost him the election. And you all know this, if democracy is saved this year, it will be due to women. They're the front lines of the activism. At every meeting I see, they're I think leading volunteer efforts. They're getting signatures for all sorts of things. They saved us in Ohio last August, November. And if we win this November, we got women to thank for it.
Well, Joe, I mean, you were involved, and I think which is one of the great historic victories of modern politics, when for the first time this century, a Democrat was elected to the Senate who previously hadn't been a Republican. A real Democrat got elected. When you were able to beat Roy Moore. And in that race, was it not black women who were the core constituency that made the difference?
Yeah, it was women writ large. It was black women in particular that drove a dramatic surge in black vote and in turnout. We got to 95% of the black vote, and a turnout that rivaled Obama's turnout when he was on the ballot in 2008. But at the same time, there were this is the first time I saw sort of white Republican women, and this was before Dobbs.
What year was this, Joe? What year this was?
It's 2017. So it was right after Trump was president. Was elected in 2016. But we needed. Alabama's pretty Republican. It's like 65%. So you can't win there without. You can get a large black vote, and they voted way above their percentage in the voting population. But you still have to get a considerable number of Republicans. It was Republican women who aligned with those black women in terms of delivering the votes that made that upset victory there. And I think that's what we're seeing now. I mean, I think it's women writ large, not just it's college-educated women. It's even she's closed the gap with non-college. She still may lose that vote. But when you look at it across the board, it is women. David's absolutely right. If democracy's saved, it's going to be women who carried us over the line.
Yeah. So David, when you look at these states, the critical states that we talk about a lot, which do you feel the shakiest about, and which do you feel the most confident about?
I mean, I'm not there enough to know. I worry the most when I see the numbers out of sort of the southern, the Georgias, the Arizonas. Those were ones a couple of years ago after 2020. I thought, hey, we're starting to move there, and I think we're in okay shape in the Senate race in Arizona. But those ones, they consistently seem to be a couple points behind. I hope that's not how it ends up, but that tells us, North Carolina actually is the one that hope someone asked about the governor's race there. Hopefully that helps. But yeah, the Georgia and Arizona races are the states are the two that the numbers they're consistently enough to there's slight deficit that worries me. And you just obviously have to hope that Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan come through, and then hopefully we get. Yeah, and by the way, someone just posted the early vote numbers today. Go back to Joe's point about getting those votes in early. Huge early vote today in Georgia, and a well coordinated effort can overcome what looks like a 1-point deficit pretty well if you're just plugging away, narrowing the universe. And what to go back to Joe's point, what it allows you to do, if all the regular voters get their votes in early, it lets them target the last few weeks on the irregular, sporadic voters who are the hardest to get out.
The lower
They don't have to waste their time on someone's going to vote anyway. Yeah. This is how Obama won. They really used early vote and ultimately election day to get the voters that we know are going to vote for our candidate, but just don't vote for whatever reason. It's difficult. It's just something they haven't done as much. And the more the regular voters get their vote out of the way, the more they can really target the irregular voters, the sporadic voters. And that's how you can overcome a slight deficit through good organizing.
And, what I think people miss is that this organization, it was the Biden-Harris campaign that put this organization in place. Why? They were worried about Biden not having the energy, the excitement. So they knew they had to have a very robust, on the ground, strongly organized campaign. Harris inherited that, but then on top of it, all the money that she got and the energy and those hundreds of thousands of volunteers that plugged into that existing machine that they were building out there to get these votes out. So now when you put this early vote process in place and you see these records, Georgia, it was 250,000 votes today. That was 136,000 votes on the first day of 2020. So nearly double on the first day. If you keep that up, it gets right back to what David said. It funnels down to those voters that are less likely to turn out, that are going to take more of a focus. But then all that money, all that organization, all that energy gets focused on those voters and are on the doors on election day. We get more of them out. And that's how that margin of 14,000 in Georgia that we won by in 2020 or thereabouts, in North Carolina, Biden only lost by 74,000 votes. Nikki Haley got 250,000 votes against Trump in North Carolina. How many of those voters? It's a real game of understanding what voters you can move and what voters you can turn out. And the more we increase the early vote numbers, the more it gives the campaign the ability to focus on those two other groups. Who can they move and who can they get out that are sporadic and may not turn out unless they're really talked to repeatedly.
We think it's fair to say that the huge numbers in Georgia today are positive.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
The question is, does it plateau? Do we see that those numbers keep moving? We don't want to see, again, like if the second day last time, and I don't know what that number was, but if it was at 150, I'd like to see a number slightly ahead of it and just sort of keep that gradient up above 2020 would be great.
Well, I
definitely off to a great start.
We talked about this before, but the one thing that Republicans in a ground operation really did best, and we always prided ourselves, we did better than Democrats. I'm not really sure that's true, but we thought it was absentee voting, it was called in. And we really had this system where you would touch everybody 3 times, and you really, people came up who were operatives in the Republican political world. This was kind of like working in the mail room. You would do a cycle in the absentee voter, and it was really good because it really sort of taught you how elections work. What is it that people motivate? And that really doesn't exist anymore. And you saw in the off elections in January of 2021 in Georgia, when the discouragement that Trump impacted his own voters by saying the whole system's rigged, don't bother voting. I mean, that was an amazing day. You elected, 2 Democrat senators from Georgia, like, wow, in a runoff. Yeah. So let me ask you guys, David, I think it's always interesting at this point to kind of look at what are the closing arguments that each campaign is building toward. I always like to think of campaigns as arguments in front of a jury. And that in a perfect campaign, you could run your first spot as your last spot. You say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in this race, I'm going to prove to you the following. And at the end, you say, I've proved you the following. How do you see the closing arguments of both campaigns, David?
It's a great question. I do. Like you said, I think it was really smart to focus in on Trump's own words in those in that speech yesterday. I hope they keep doing that because it's one thing that's bizarre to me. If we think 39 minutes of him dancing is weird, wait till you hear what he actually says in these speeches.
Yeah.
It shows you how normalized things have gotten that we think the silence is weirder than insane commitments he's making in these speeches. So I think getting focused on those, I think those are dark enough that I think some voters who aren't really sure, they hear enough of that, it may just say this is too much. I also, though, think since the debates, going back to women, I think getting back to abortion and choice, women's issues is really important. It's kind of gotten lost in the conversation right now. It doesn't feel as real as, let's say, it did last November when we had a 57-43 pro-reproductive freedom vote in Ohio. So I actually think figuring out how to get that back into the conversation so that you do get you get a decisive majority of all women, but a majority of white women saying, my gosh, this is going after my freedom, my reproductive freedom. I think making sure that is viewed as the stakes between now. They've done a decent job of making it about Springfield through all their lies and immigration. I think arm wrestling back to women and freedom and abortion in a lot of these states could be the decider. And that feels like it hasn't been as front and center. We saw a great job with Kamala Harris and Waltz in the debates on that. And by the way, in Ohio, one of the things that helped Sherrod Brown is Bernie Moreno made a ridiculous comment about why do women over 50 even care about abortion? Yeah. And he's reinvigorated the Sherrod side because he brought abortion back in. I would be intentionally doing that in every state I could.
Absolutely. I think it's the contrast. And it's pitting the contrast as Trump's the danger to women's rights and the banning abortion. He's the danger to our democracy, the danger of that his own generals point out of him not being competent to lead the country. I just think it's setting up the contrast, but pushing Trump as a danger to women, to the country, to the democracy itself. But on top of that, I think that she is. I think they're already doing that. But on top of that, and I think this is happening, give those Republicans a permission structure. I think Cheney's doing that. I think that you're seeing that with, I think, the members of his own administration saying they're voting for Harris. All those things, if he's the danger to women on every issue, to what will happen with inflation if he's put back in power, tariffs, all that stuff, make him the danger and make the contrast in such a way that it sort of leverages that permission structure that these Republicans who are out there and siding with Kamala Harris give to enough Republican voters, Haley supporters and others, to move here in the last few weeks. That's where I would go.
I've always thought that there were 2 essential goals that the Harris campaign, same for the Biden campaign, needed to accomplish. They needed to represent the future, which I think that Harris campaign, I was so ecstatic to see them seize on "Don't Go Back," because we don't pass the torch backwards in America, and they have to be. I think Harris has to be the safer choice. less risky. And you can see that dynamic beginning to set up here. And I just think we can't talk enough, and I hope it doesn't get lost. And in the Lincoln Project, we're trying to bring it out, of the extraordinary nature of Trump's talking about military tribunals to try Liz Cheney, the former Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley. I mean, the unstated thing is military tribunals have the right to find that you will be hung. And he talks about that. And I think that we undervalue the seriousness of that at our own danger and our own risk.
I agree.
Because who is going to stop Trump inside that White House if he's back in there? It's talked about a lot, but the fools and buffoons and jokers that are around him now aren't remotely going to stop him.
Right.
Well, look, as we wind this up, we got 3 more weeks here. Joe, what do you see? Like, when we sit here a week from now, how are we going to know if Harris won that week? How do you see this unfolding?
I don't think that's going to be the way this goes. This is going to be a very close race. I think she has the lead. I think she's going to keep it. I think it's just a question of all the work that needs to be done. But I think, I think focus on, I think you'll see a big focus on the blue wall states for sure.
Right.
Because if she wins all 3 of those, then it's pretty tough for Trump to get there. But I still think Georgia, North Carolina, these other states are in play. It'll be interesting to see what the travel schedule looks like and where the campaign is putting its resources. But right now, it's fighting all of them. And no, I think Pluff has said this, and I kind of agree with him. Look, this could be a 52-48, a 51-46 kind of race. But in those key states, those battleground states, it's going to be 1 point. It could be within 1 point all across all of them.
Yeah.
Which is why what we're talking about, that early vote, getting it's the ground game, stupid now. I know they're going to go out and still try to move. I think that permission structure for Republicans to swing over is important, but I think it's all ground game from here on in. Keep an eye on that early vote in Pennsylvania, that early vote in Georgia, North Carolina, and these places where Texas opens up its early vote tomorrow. I think it'll be interesting to watch that one in terms of what's going on with how much of that is Democratic, et cetera, in terms of whether Allred, who's closed it to a point, can overtake Cruz, and which I think is clearly possible. But I think there's lots of places to watch, but it all involves getting the early vote out and keeping focused on the ground game.
Yeah, the one thing campaigns cannot lie about is where they travel and where they spend money.
Yeah.
And all the rest is really bullshit. It's just spin. It's when you sit in those rooms and you have to make this decision. You've got X number of days. And people always say, well, you should go to Richmond. You should go to Erie. You should go to Winston-Salem. And my answer always was, you're right. We should. But this is Sophie's choice.
Right.
Going to one place means you don't go to that other place. And that is really, I think, where the steadiness of a campaign, and what strikes me about the Harris campaign is like a sports team moving into the final stages of the game. They seem to have composure. They seem to know what they're doing. It's deliberate. They feel like they're winning. They don't want to get cocky, but they feel like they're winning. Whereas you look at Trump, and clearly, if you think you're winning, you don't start talking about executing former Joint Chiefs of Staff. This is a sort of insanity that he has. And I think that there is a good question on a certain level. Have they given up on the campaign and they're more focused on the election to inauguration campaign? That's a subject for another day, but I think it's really troubling.
I do want to correct one thing. Texas early vote starts about a week from now on the 21st, not tomorrow. So I just wanted to correct myself.
Well, if I could add one more motivation, although I agree, realistically, these are going to be close. you probably told me this before. The best way to avoid their election to inauguration plan is to blow it out of the water.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Have the drama be over at 11 p.m.
Yep.
Whatever they may say, because Fox called it for Arizona like they did 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And
right.
that was that. And that basically framed everything that came after as BS. And we have to, Pennsylvania, this is where this is going to be key. And so if you're not feeling that motivated because you think she may win by a point, and that's fine. No, winning by 3 points in a state versus one could be all the difference in not having another round of election denialism that people take seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go on the record. I think she's going to win Pennsylvania. I've sat there in these Republican campaigns, and at this stage in the campaign, we always thought we could win Pennsylvania. I remember in the Romney campaign, on the Saturday before the Tuesday election, for some reason, we had this massive rally at midnight outside of Philadelphia. And it was just like thousands and thousands of people at midnight. And we left that, headed to Florida, thinking we're going to win Pennsylvania. It's like, nope, you're not. Yeah. You're going to end up losing by about 100,000 votes. And that, until Trump won it in 2016, which I think was very fluky, the last Republican to win Pennsylvania in a presidential race was George Bush in 1988. So I think the state is, if you look at the test drive of when they nominated this sort of mini-me Margiotta guy for governor, who was blown out of the water when Shapiro was elected.
Right.
I think that's the Pennsylvania that's going to carry the day in this race.
Yeah.
Well, look, we should finish up. I just want to, can we put up again the podcast where, everybody should go there. Project 2025. You can find it, right, David?
It's great.
Wherever your favorite podcasts are being downloaded.
And what not to plug too hard, share it with the people who you don't think really have paid attention to what Trump is saying.
Great point.
What this tries to do is make people feel what it's like, what he says about these issues, how it would play out. And once you hear that, it's a lot harder to forget than some list of talking points that flew past on your Twitter feed.
Yeah. And, I got to say, everybody who's watching this, it would be so great if you could subscribe to Resolute Square. I mean, this is how these movements grow. And, we don't get any support from corporate America. We don't get any support from political parties. We don't get any support from special interests. This is really, truly a citizens-driven, pro-democracy platform. And that's our only issue. That's what we're for. So listen to the podcast. There's a new show. That second show is going to be on tomorrow night. Maya May, who is an unbelievable talent, called Punching Up. She really is extraordinary. And you should definitely watch that. She had a great first show last week, and I'm really looking forward to next week. So thanks, everybody out there. Vote as soon as you can, and walk with confidence. We're going to win this thing.
Thanks, guys. Take care, everybody.
Bye. All the best. Thanks, Dave. Take care.